Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to reflect. I'm halfway through Dolor and Shadow. Currently at chapter 33. I just finished up yesterday and posted, so I am at chapter 34, which I will be reading and posting today. There are 66 chapters in Dolor and Shadow, plus an epilogue. So we are officially at the halfway point. So I just want to kind of take a step back now and talk a little bit about the writing process. Up to this point, there were several revisions done on Dolor and Shadow. I actually wrote the book 5 times, and I mean complete rewrite. The first edition of the book, the first draft, I don't even want to call it a draft because I thought the book was complete and I was submitting it at that point to agents, and that was 6 or 5 years ago. That draft was about, I would have to place it at about 60,000 words, 90,000, between 60 and 90,000. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but I think it was 90,000 because I had finished the book and I realized it was a 60,000. And in order for it to fall into the category I wanted it to, I had to up the word count by an additional 30. So I created the Devagar at that point, and who you're about to meet, and inserted them into the story. So the next part that I read to you was completely inserted in the story for no other reason than to expand the length of the book, to fit it into the genre that I wanted. There is a word count for every genre, and fantasy must begin at about 90,000 and up. It's 120,000 is a good epic. If you fall short of that, you end up with a lot of fantasy fans who are a bit disgruntled because they prefer their longer fantasies. So I went through and, for the sake of word count and nothing else, created the Devagar. And what evolved from that was just, it blew my mind away. They are such a main part of book 1 that I can't imagine the book without them. So that was just amazing how that turned out. But the second part with Dolor and Shadow was the entire first section of the book. Actually, most of it didn't exist. The book actually started with the words, Kallan decided not to kill him, which was, if you recall correctly, that was all the way back at, it was, let me see here. I'm really curious because it's been a while. Okay, it was chapter 13, I believe. No, it wasn't chapter 13, was it? It was right after Rune followed her out of the camp, and she met Rune for the first time. So it was actually supposed to start with, and it's funny just how far it's come. Okay, here it is. So chapter 14. So chapter 15 was actually the first chapter of the book at one point. Oh, no, I see. Okay, it's chapter 14. All right, it was the break in chapter 15. Yes, it was chapter 14, and it was the break. Kallan decided not to kill him. Page 107. That was actually where the book began, and it was originally going to be she was bathing, and bear with me here, so don't slap me for this one. It was going to start off with her taking a bath in the forest, and Rune finds her and spies on her. And she gets out of the bath, and she starts to walk back to Lorlenalin when he finds her. That's actually the original beginning, and that was all the way back when I first started writing it. So I dropped the bath scene, which actually, near the very end of the book, almost 3/4 of the way through it, I did a little sing to kind of, almost an ode to that original bath scene. But it was different. It was, you'll find it's much different, and there's far more meaning to it, and there's a whole lot more to it now. But I hated the aura, the message delivered on that first chapter. I would have lost a lot of readers who would have enjoyed the book, the epic readers, and I would have attracted a lot of romance readers who would have looked at the book and later on would have hated it for what it would become. So that was one of the first things to go, was the bath scene. And then the first words being, she decided not to kill him. And this last revision actually added all of this. Most of the entire prologue, not the prologue, but part one, where you are introduced to Bergen, when you're introduced to Rune, to the whole group, where you meet Swan, you meet Kallan, and you see them being killed. None of that took place. It was all backstory that you discover throughout the book later on. Actually, not even later on. Book 2 is when I finally fill in that blank. And I had reserved that opening for book 3. That was actually how I was going to open book 3. And I was speaking to a friend of mine, B.R. Kingsolver, and I explained to Kingsolver how I was planning on opening the book. And I was advised, the email came back, why are you waiting for book 3 to reveal that? That's awesome. And I went, yeah, why am I waiting till book 3? So I took Kingsolver's advice and went ahead and wrote it all in, which is great because it was the thing I was dying to write. So the fact that I didn't have to wait till book 3 to write it, I was able to go right ahead and write it. That was pure ecstatic for me. So I indulged. I absolutely went all out, and I think it shows. I really think it shows. And it's funny because I just watched an interview with Adam Drui, and he was explaining how he was author 1.0 and then author 2.0. And it's a beautiful analogy because authors do go through this period. The more they write, the better they get. But you're still publishing as you're improving. So you can pick up an author's first book and go, whoa. And then you'll pick up an author's 5th book and you'll definitely see an improvement in their writing. And it's very rarely you won't do that. So, and that's why Dolor and Shadow got rewritten 5 times, is because it went through, author 1.0 wrote the first edition and it was terrible. I still have it. Author 2.0, then I expanded to author 2.0. I basically upgraded while I was working on Dolor and Shadow. And I kept upgrading. My writing skill kept getting improving, so that by the time I got to the final edition, I was finally at that point where I could read through the whole book without changing anything. And I had vowed that when I finally got to that point where I could read the whole book without changing anything, it was ready for publication. It took me 7 years to get it to that point. So as of January 2015, I was still writing Dolor and Shadow. I was speaking to another friend of mine, and I was informed we had a lot to work on regarding the shadow that Rune adopts, and I was able to, that was just completely new. So Dolor and Shadow published on May 31st. On, I think it was February 2015. I was still inserting these chunks of the story. It still wasn't done. And the difference it made, it was just amazing, that the edge that it took the story. Rune had no powers originally. He got his butt kicked a lot by Kallan. She could wield flame, and he literally spent most of the book just dodging it. And I had this massive Goliath of a character, Bergen, who comes out in book 2, and you get to see a lot of Bergen in book 2. He's also all over my website. When that's up, you can take a look, and Bergen's everywhere. He has a very, very prominent personality. He's very, well, I call him my pompous, overbearing warlord for a reason. And his personality really shines through. There's a reason for that, and that comes out in book 3. But I had, in comparison to Bergen and Kallan, that you had these very strong characters, and Rune was just pathetic and weak. So one of the things that we did was, in conversation, was the concept of taking Rune and upgrading him to this uber character. So I gave him a superpower, basically, that was on par with Kallan's, and that it was like the anti-save, is what I like to call it in the background here. It's the anti-save that can handle it. So when she shoots at him now, he takes it like it's and he has something to work with. So it dropped Kallan from being a super character, and it took Rune from being way down here, and it literally just did that with him. And it brought the book. It did so much to the book. In fact, Lorlenalin's Lies at this moment is ready for publication. I could release it at this moment, but I changed everything in February 2015 with Rune's new superpower. So what I'm doing right now with Lorlenalin's Lies, it's now being changed to Fire and Lies. What I'm doing now with Fire and Lies is going through it and adding Rune's superpower. So every time Kallan blasts him in Lorlenalin's Lies, Fire and Lies, instead of him falling down and dodging it and being a weak, pathetic thing, he has to stand up and take it and fight. And I'm just, that's what I'm doing right now, is I'm adding that. Also, Fand takes a much more forward approach. You learn a lot more about Fand. Her fingers were far more into the mixture and everything going on. So with Fire and Lies, that was something else that I definitely put her more in the forefront. So and there's a lot of dominoes she tips over, so that you see that more in book 2. The other thing with Fand was, well, Lorlenalin's Lies and Dolor and Shadow were actually one book, and the word count was up to 270,000 words. It was literally twice as long as Dolor and Shadow. And I was submitting Dolor, at that time it was just Lorlenalin's Lies. I was submitting Lorlenalin's Lies through to agents, and I was getting a lot of positive feedback. I had probably 8 to 10 people tell me I want to see more, but every one of them came back and said it is too long, or they said I have no idea how to market this. So one lady came back and said to me, have you considered cutting it in half? And I said no, I didn't. So I took her advice, I cut it in half, and that required some reworking, so that, because you see like the arc go this way, and then book 2 takes it and completes the circle. I couldn't do that with Dolor and Shadow, so I had to cut the book in half, and I had to tie up that arc. So I have a mini arc in Dolor and Shadow, and then I have this other story arc that just kind of extends up here. And I'm forewarning you, you're reading it because this is actually part 1 of a larger story that completes in part 2, but really kicks off book 3. But there is a smaller arc, and that smaller arc is, and that's the one with, the goal is to get back to Alfheim alive. That is the goal. The goal is to survive a character who hasn't been introduced yet. And no, actually he has been. He has been in the prologue. Like I said, I just rewrote this like a year ago, so I'm like, oh yeah. Olaf has been assigned by Fand to track down Kallan, well, to say Kona with the pouch. So obviously it's going to be Kallan. And he's going to be chasing after her, of course. He's going to be coming into the picture here in a moment. I think he's got 2 more chapters to his appearance. So that is the arc you're to follow. Not I have this other massive arc, and that I have a lot of readers, a few of them anyway, who've commented, I think only 2 really, who've commented there's a lot of questions left unanswered. Yes, there are a lot of questions left unanswered, and they will be tied up for the most part in Lorlenalin's Lies, Fire and Lies. But it's not really the focus of Dolor and Shadow. It basically presents a much larger story. So when I decided to cut Dolor and Shadow in half, I had no name for book 1. I felt Lorlenalin's Lies was appropriate for book 2. So I stuck Lorlenalin's Lies to book 2, but that left me without a title for book 1. And I was going to go traditional publishing at the time. I was throwing some ideas together. And then I realized it doesn't really matter what I call the book. They're going to change it anyway, because 90% of the time, an agent, a publisher, will change the name of the book for marketing purposes. So I literally called it whatever, I'm just like Dolor and Shadow. I think I called it Pang and Shadow, but it was way too romancy. So I changed the title to Dolor and Shadow and threw it out on the market. And after a couple months, the name, it really set well with me. I grew fond of it, and that's when I decided not to traditional publish and to go ahead and self-publish. That's when I decided to keep the name, and Lorlenalin's Lies recently changed over to Fire and Lies, because I didn't want readers picking up the book and those unable to even say Lorlenalin would put the book down. So I changed it to Fire and Lies only recently, and I will be adopting that Fire and Lies, Dolor and Shadow, Winter and Ice and Winter. I can't remember, I have to look it up. Oh, Winter and Ash and Winter. Something, I can't remember. It's really bad, what I just said. It's not that bad. It's actually really cool. Embers and Ash. I think Embers and Ash is one of the books. So I did like that approach to it. I think Winter and Ash. is the names of book 3, Winter and Ash. I'm certain Winter and Ash is book 3. So I just loved it. I loved it. And it flowed. It really did flow. So that I think that really is the majority of what I can tell you without spoilers for the construction of Dolor and Shadow. The other thing that I really enjoyed doing was showing Kallan. In book 2, she's not mentioned at all, or she's not mentioned at all until book 2. Almost near the end of the book, there's this moment where Kallan asks what happened. And this was prior to my big reveal with the story that you read in the prologue here. And a character sits down with Kallan and says, well, this is what happened. And he retells everything that you read in the part 1 of Dolor and Shadow, which is great for book 2 in that recap, in case you didn't read it, or in case you can't remember. Here's what happened, and it's a little summary of what happened, and so you're there when Kallan learns of it. But it was just, the whole thing was just absolutely fascinating how it came about. And by doing it the way I did it, I was able to actually bring Kallan into the picture and show you who she was. And she, without a doubt, was one of my favorite characters. I absolutely adored her. There was a lot of little things I was able to put in there as well. So just some things to remember. The Sclavinian egg that Berrigan introduces to Swan in the very beginning, that stays, and that's still very important. Something else to keep in mind is Swan's song. That's also important, and that comes out later on. That doesn't come out until much, much later though, but the lyrics to Swan's song are, they play a prominent role in it. The music, in case you were wondering, was composed by myself. I hated reading Tolkien songs and not knowing how they sounded. So when I actually got to see the movie The Hobbit, it was wonderful to hear Blunt the Knives, and I'm so glad they cleaned it up. They cleaned that up so much nicer than what Tolkien had written. Rhythm-wise, the lyrics were pretty much the same, but they adjusted the sentences so that the rhythm flowed much better. So I'm huge on hearing the music instead of just writing it down. So on my website, when it's back up again, I do have available the composition to Swan's song, so you can print it out. Those who are musically inclined are more than welcome to perform it, play with it, add an ensemble to it. I don't care. Do whatever you want with it. I just strongly request that you credit me anywhere if it's mentioned. But yeah, I absolutely am open to my work being shared. But that is Swan Song. And there was one other thing that oh yes, when there's this moment where Berrigan, I'm sure you're already asking this, what happens to Berrigan from the time he leaves at the end of part 1 when he says he's going to go get help, and then there's this blank period. And yes, there is a blank period, and yes, that is revisited, and you'll see more of that in book 2. So, thank you very much.